Columbia College has a distinguished history of educating military service members for about 40 years now. The college began educating a handful of service members in St. Louis back in 1973. These service members, their dependents, and veterans now comprise a third of the college's 25,000 students at nearly 20 military bases from Washington State to Florida, including one in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Few of these military students are more illustrious than former Tuskegee Airman Colonel Charles McGee, who graduated from the Columbia College Kansas City campus in 1978 with a degree in business administration. These airmen were a select group of World War II fighter pilots who began training in Tuskegee, Alabama in 1941 and first saw combat in Europe in 1943. Before the Tuskegee Airmen, no U.S. military pilots had been African American. McGee was sworn into the Army Air Corps Enlisted Reserve on October 27, 1942, just 10 days after marrying Frances Kitten Nelson. He then reported to Tuskegee.
Well, I had a draft card. I was also in ROTC and had an idea of what the ground soldier's life was like, and so the draft wasn't very inviting. And when the opportunity came to try out for the Army Air Corps, I went and was able to pass the exams and the physical. And after that first ride, I was hooked and knew I'd made the right decision, because I fell in love with aviation. I hadn't been around an airplane, hadn't kicked any. I think I made some paper planes in school and wondered why the teacher was looking at me, thinking I would throw it. But other than that, no, I hadn't. I just fell in love with, after that first flight, and it's hard to tell somebody when you get off the ground and loop, roll, and spin and do things you can't do when you have to have something attached to the ground.
After training, McGee was shipped overseas for escort duty. He faced more problems than just enemy ground fire and German fighters while escorting American bombers to their targets. He also had to deal with racial discrimination. In the air, the P-51 Red Tails, as the unit was called, were saviors to the B-24 and B-17 crews. But on the ground, they were all too often used as scapegoats.
You can go with a chip on your shoulder, but somebody's going to knock it off, and a fight doesn't usually resolve much, so it was a matter of carrying myself in a way that I hope would be respected and give others respect as well along the way. A lot of good talent was going to waste because somebody didn't give them the opportunity or didn't provide the training. Once that was done, it made all the difference. And I think opened some eyes, and certainly we have found since then that talent doesn't come in happenstance of birth or color of skin. Because that's the first time in the country that a large group of blacks were used in a technical area, and the common thought was you get a large group of blacks together anywhere at that time, you're going to have riots and just all kinds of things. But these were, as I say, biases and generalizations that weren't, it's amazing to me because the 1925 Army War College study listed as facts that blacks were physically qualified and their strengths should be used if the country got involved in another war, but mentally not capable, morally not capable, and this is like closing your eyes to reality.
McGee had the word kitten painted in big red letters on the nose of his plane in honor of his wife, and to salute his crew chief, who kept his aircraft engine purring like a contented kitten. On August 23, 1944, McGee spotted a formation of German fighters while escorting B-17s en route to the target. McGee slid Kitten onto the tail of a fleeing German FW-190 in the skies over Austria, fired his 6 big .50 caliber machine guns, and struck a blow for civil rights back home. The 190 crashed and exploded on the airfield below. He strafed a hangar and a switch engine on his way out. Jobs for black pilots were non-existent after the war, so McGee stayed in the Air Force. With the start of the Korean War in 1950 and a shortage of qualified fighter pilots, he was soon back to full combat flying status. His squadron flew against North Koreans and Russians in F-51 Mustangs, then in F-80 Shooting Stars, helping to save the Pusan perimeter and battling as far north as the Yalu River. He completed 100 fighter-bomber combat missions, most low-altitude interdiction and close support, which exposed him to enormous enemy ground fire. McGee was swept into Vietnam, too. Now a lieutenant colonel with European and domestic experience, his wife Kitten must have been relieved to learn he had orders to report to the Pentagon in 1967. These were promptly changed to reconnaissance missions in RF-4 Phantoms. He and 5 other pilots continued to fly missions during the Tet Offensive, when the majority of pilots were hugging the dirt under steel helmets. He also commanded a fighter squadron in the Philippines, a reconnaissance squadron at Richard Gabar Air Force Base just south of Kansas City, and ended his career as the Air Force fighter combat record holder with 409 missions and 1,151 combat hours. McGee earned his degree from Columbia College in 1978, 5 years after mandatory retirement.
Good school. Timing was right, location was right. I retired from service in January of 1973 and worked there in Kansas City with the business. There again, realizing that I had, along the way through my service career, wherever I had a chance to take additional courses or night courses, I had done a number of studies as I moved around, and it was just time to put it all together and go on and get the degree. And the courses and that were offered were right in line with where I was to go on and complete the degree study. So I became an alumni of Columbia College. Education is extremely important, whether I almost could say whether you use it or not, but it brings out talent and capability that's latent, and if you don't get the education, sometimes you don't know that it's there, and so it's a combination of providing growth and opportunity for the individual, but I've always looked at it as the individual grows, so does our community and our country. The old saying that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and if we drop back educationally, I'd like to tell youngsters we haven't solved all of our problems. Re-entry from space, the space plane, still fuels and materials for the airframe to stand the heat, lots of talent. It takes education to be able to find the individuals with the skills that will help us solve those problems. And I like to tell youngsters now, hey, the president said we're going to Mars and they're planning, working on it. But I say, guess who's going? It's not most of the folks that's planning, it's just some youngster that's sitting in high school now that 15 years from now, 20, 30, 32, when they're ready, that's who's going to make the trip.
President George W. Bush awarded the surviving Tuskegee Airmen the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in 2007, more than 60 years since the end of World War II.
There goes the old saying, better late than never, but
McGee's beloved wife passed away in 1994. Colonel McGee and Frances raised 3 successful children. McGee is proud to have contributed to racial equality in the defense of this country. That he spent so much time in the air is just a bonus.
Wow. You know, the greatest thrill in flying to me, though, is to be able to, well, back in the day, we can't do it now because it costs so much and planes. Back in earlier days, at the end of the day, if you wanted to go flying and there happened to be a plane freed and you need to get some hours or nighttime, but to take off at sunset and particularly, and this applies to jet age, and in just a few minutes climb up to 38 or 40,000 feet and literally see the sunset a second time, and then that big canopy of stars come out overhead. You can't pass that thrill and feeling on to somebody else. You have to experience it for yourself. But the best way I express it, it makes you really realize that we human beings are really only a very small speck in a mighty grand universe.
Columbia College has over 30 campuses from coast to coast, half of which are on military bases, online, or in evening programs, which makes earning a college degree easier for busy working adults, whether driving a jet off an aircraft carrier or a car to a desk job.
Proud to be a graduate of Columbia College, and it's good to see what's going on and the growth still taking place and what that means.
Come see for yourself what makes Columbia College so special.